Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other progressive lawmakers who should know better casted votes this weekend that are downright immoral and indefensible, in my opinion. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video, because I believe that we should hold elected officials accountable, even if we generally support them, because that's how you get them to be better. You can argue that it's unproductive given how bad the other members of Congress are, and that's a reasonable take. But my standards personally are much higher for politicians that I respect, and I refuse to excuse bad behavior, especially when it's an issue as important as the one that we're dealing with today. So on Friday, Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, proposed an amendment to a defense appropriations bill that would strip funding away from Israel for its Iron Dome missile defense system, and that amendment failed overwhelmingly. Just 6 lawmakers voted for it, 2 Republicans and 4 Democrats, the Republicans being Marjorie Greene and Thomas Massie, and the Democrats were Al Green, Summer Lee, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. Notably absent, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ro Khanna, Delia Ramirez, Pramila Jayapal, Ayanna Pressley, Greg Kasar, Maxwell Frost, Mark Pocan, and others. And this is disappointing, because members of Congress who don't take AIPAC money, who are generally good on this issue, somehow fucked up and voted against an amendment that would have stripped away money from a rogue state doing a genocide, and it doesn't make sense to me. Now, you can argue that their votes didn't matter since the amendment was doomed to fail, and you can also make the case that these members of Congress did this for self-preservation because they didn't eventually want to be attacked for supporting an anti-Israel amendment proposed by Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's a plethora of excuses that you can come up with, but at the end of the day, if you believe that Israel is committing a genocide, then you have a moral obligation to use your power to stop it. Period. These lawmakers failed to do that, and it will be a stain on every one of their records. But we don't have to speculate about their motivations, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually explained why she voted the way that she did. So let's hear her out. She says, Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment does nothing to cut off offensive aid to Israel, nor end the flow of U.S. munitions being used in Gaza. Of course, I voted against it. What it does do is cut off defensive Iron Dome capacities while allowing the actual bombs killing Palestinians to continue. I have long stated that I do not believe that adding to the death count of innocent victims to this war is constructive to its end. That is a simple and clear difference of opinion that has long been established. I remain focused on cutting the flow of U.S. munitions that are being used to perpetrate the genocide in Gaza. So I've got to say, as somebody who has defended AOC in the past and glazed her up, this is probably one of the worst tweets that she's ever put out, because her logic here makes no sense. First of all, there's no difference between offensive weapons and defensive weapons. This is an Orwellian distinction that our leaders made up to justify the sale of weapons to human rights abusers. And there's especially no distinction to be made here with regard to Israel, since they've offensively attacked the West Bank and Gaza and Lebanon and Syria and Yemen and Iran, all within the span of a year. Furthermore, them having to spend less on defensive weapons frees up more money for them to spend on offensive weapons, which is why I say the distinction here between offensive and defensive is completely fucking meaningless. They're just weapons. You don't have to make that distinction. Second of all, you can't say that Israel is perpetrating a genocide in Gaza in one breath, but in the next say that you should give them weapons for self-defense that we're not giving to their victims. What the fuck kind of shit is that? So, framing this as some sort of a humanitarian move is deeply disingenuous on her part. You wouldn't fund an Iron Dome for Russia after they invaded Ukraine, would you? You would be denying Ukraine the right to self-defense, which would embolden Russia's offensive efforts. If anyone in the Middle East needs a fucking Iron Dome, it's Palestinians, it's Lebanon, it's Iran, it's other neighbors that Israel has attacked. Third, why do we have to give my tax dollars to a country that is fully capable of funding their own missile defense system? They have a universal healthcare system. We don't. Why can't they pay for their own fucking Iron Dome, AOC? Also, I feel like this being Marjorie Greene's amendment may be factored into her decision-making, but that is completely irrelevant here. A broken clock can be right twice a day. Okay, I am no fan of Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I don't know what her motivations were for this amendment, but I don't give a shit, because the outcome would be objectively good. So needless to say, I think that her reasoning here is terrible. It's honestly embarrassing. And her tweet was widely condemned by leftists because they saw right through it, and she was even ratioed by some of them. Here's just a couple of examples. Kyle Kalinske says this is pathetic. Mike from PA says this is a painfully childish analysis. Either you are attempting to do something for a purely politically cynical reason, or your advisors are some of the most incompetent in Washington. Francesca Fiorentini says, you knew it wasn't going to pass, so why not take a stand against military aid to Israel, even if sponsored by Green? Your progressive colleagues, far more vulnerable than you, stood on business against genocide. You gotta buck the liberal Zionist lobbyists in your ear. Denham says disappointing to defend Israel just for the love of the game, and she points out that AOC takes no money from AIPAC, so, I mean, there's really no excuse for this. Blakely says defensive aid as they fucking slaughter the Palestinians and bomb the shit out of every country around them. Pathetic. Gatto says, oh, so sending, quote, defensive weapons to Nazi Germany while it was doing a Holocaust would have been fine. Makes sense. Thanks for clearing that up. Caitlin Johnstone says, I didn't give the mass shooter guns and ammunition. I just bought him a bulletproof vest so nobody could stop the massacre. Great point. And I even chimed in saying this is indefensible. A country doing a literal genocide should get $0. And I feel like that's something that I shouldn't have to say, especially to a progressive. But progressives online weren't the only ones outraged, because the DSA released a statement condemning her vote, writing, any funds that go to Israel assist this brutal genocide. Any support for Israel legitimizes its eliminationist campaign against the Palestinian people. The fact that Representative Ocasio-Cortez acknowledges that Israel is carrying out this genocide makes her support for military aid all the more disappointing and incongruous. Now, on top of that, her Bronx office was actually vandalized by a group called Boogie Down Liberation Front, who condemned her vote and accused her of funding Israel's genocide. So this goes without saying, but she is now experiencing severe backlash for this vote, perhaps the most backlash she's ever faced. She's been criticized before, and there's been a lot of things that she's done that have rubbed the left the wrong way, but I mean, this really is on a new level, and I think that you can argue that it's unfair for her to be singled out when so many other progressive members of Congress did the same thing, and I hear you, but I think that the reason why she's bearing the brunt of the backlash is twofold. One, because she put out a bad statement, and it angered people, rightfully so, but also because, unlike the others, she is viewed as a leader, possibly the successor to Bernie Sanders' movement. So the standards for her are going to be higher than the other individuals who aren't necessarily viewed as potential leaders. And Bernie Sanders himself even faced a lot of backlash from the left on this issue, even from yours truly, over his refusal to call for a ceasefire at the start of the genocide. But he has since come around and gotten a lot better on this, which demonstrates that pressure works. Like, you shouldn't bite your tongue because you support a politician. You should criticize them in good faith in hopes that they'll listen to you. I mean, sure, you could have given Bernie Sanders a pass since he was already one of the better senators on this issue, but through sustained pressure, he became the best. And now he is leading the charge in the Senate to cut off aid to Israel, which is why you can't give politicians you respect a pass, because without constructive criticism, they're not going to improve. And Bernie, by the way, is by no means perfect. You know, back in the 2010s, he was much worse on this issue. He still won't call it a genocide and kind of characterizes Israel's war crimes as Netanyahu's war crimes, as if the occupation and the genocide would end if he weren't in charge. But I think that he's gotten demonstrably better over the years because of good faith pushback from the left. Now, while AOC has made some minor improvements on this issue in some areas, she's also very clearly regressed in certain areas, and this vote kind of seems like a breaking point for people who typically support AOC, who were frustrated by her stance on Israel-Palestine. And I say this because it's not the first misstep that she's made on this issue, even though she's been generally good on this issue, like comparatively speaking. Last year, she made the biggest fuck up yet by notoriously saying this about Kamala Harris at the DNC.
And she is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire in Gaza.
That turned out to be complete and utter bullshit. In April, JobSite News released a story about how Biden administration officials actually admitted that they never put any real pressure on Israel to get a ceasefire. But I mean, this was already apparent when AOC said that, hence why it was controversial when she made that statement, and why her own colleague Ilhan Omar took a swipe at her for it, saying working tirelessly for a ceasefire is really not a thing, and they should be ashamed of themselves, referring to the Biden administration. So that moment right there hurt her credibility with the left because it felt cynical. It felt like she was saying something that wasn't true for political reasons, and we expect more from her. And what makes her latest betrayal even more disappointing is the fact that she already faced backlash over an Iron Dome vote before, and it seemed to have like made her learn and try to adapt, I guess, but I guess not, right? So if you don't know what I'm referring to, back in 2021, she was crying on the House floor when she switched her vote from no to present on a bill that funded Israel's Iron Dome. And People magazine explains, in a subsequent post on her website addressing her constituents, Ocasio-Cortez explained her reaction during the vote and why she was against the funding. Quote, "I believe strongly that Congress should take greater scrutiny with all military funding across the world," she wrote, arguing that for far too long, the U.S. has handed unconditional aid to the Israeli government. However, she took aim at the process rather than her decision to choose present instead of yes or no, which indicated she was in the chamber for the vote, but would take no official position for or against the bill. Quote, "To those I have disappointed, I am deeply sorry," Ocasio-Cortez wrote. "To those who believe this reasoning is insufficient or cowardice, I understand. In addition to opposing the substance of the Iron Dome supplemental bill, the process of bringing it to the House floor was deeply unjust," she wrote. So after her present vote became this big thing, one would think that she would have learned from that and grown and adjusted her position, but it seems like she has not. It seems like she's now done a 180 and now explicitly supports Israel's Iron Dome and has hardened her position in her support for the Iron Dome, which is frankly unacceptable for a future leader of the progressive movement. It doesn't mean that she's irredeemable, because all politicians are going to do things and have positions that we disagree with, including ones that are progressive. But this is definitely going to be a permanent stain on her legacy that I guarantee you she will regret at some point. And if you're sensitive to criticism of leftist allies in Congress, I get that, but you have to understand that the left is right to feel frustrated, because it is demoralizing to see AOC of all people and the small handful of leftist allies that we have in Congress, with a few exceptions, fuck up this badly. This is not a complicated vote. It's simple. It's black and white. It's not unreasonable to push for consistency and moral clarity on this issue when so much is at stake. And that's what I want to bring this back to, because the core issue here is the genocide, right? As Julia Conley of Common Dreams explains, 19 Palestinians in Gaza starved to death in a single day as malnutrition gets worse and worse. And that includes 4-year-old Razan Abu Zaher, whose tiny little body is being carried by this man. It's inconceivable that he's holding a human being, but he is. But Razan is one of 76 children that Israel has starved to death. And back in June, her mother explained how she was already clinging to life due to malnutrition, but just a month later, she couldn't hold on any longer, and she passed away. Other young children like Haram Najil here could suffer the same fate if the blockade continues, which is why you have to do everything to stop this. And in this video that really stuck with me after I saw it, this young boy explains that they're forced to eat sand in Gaza because there's no food available, and he's just frustrated, and you could see it in his face because he knows what's happening. He knows that they're being starved, and it feels like the world just doesn't really care, and he's just asking for compassion. And to add insult to injury, Israel is mass murdering civilians day after day after day as they line up for food. So you're starving, and you go to the one place that tell you to go to get food, and they murder you. And on Saturday, they killed another 30 people. And as Bernie Sanders points out, 130 in total were killed over the weekend, and 1,000 were wounded. I mean, we are witnessing a modern-day Holocaust, and stopping it should be our #1 priority. And we should expect our leaders to treat this issue with the seriousness and urgency that it deserves. Children are dying. So if you can't get your fucking shit together right now and have a little bit of clarity, then it's time for you to recalibrate, adjust, and figure out why you're fucking up so bad. It's not because the left is being overly nitpicky or purity testing. It's because there's a serious issue that you're failing us on. So, I mean, you could lambaste the left for eating their own or whatever, but when this is what's at stake, I think that politicians should expect to be criticized if they're going to enable what we're seeing, either directly or indirectly, especially if they're going to concoct half-baked excuses to justify their immorality. No politician is perfect, I get that, but I mean, if we can't call out our own, especially when they vote to enable a rogue state doing a genocide, then we're as complicit as they are. And I'm talking specifically to people who might take offense at my criticism of AOC, because I saw some people responding to my comment to her saying, oh, you shouldn't, criticize. This was a setup by Marjorie, whatever. Stop. We have to be able to criticize politicians, especially when they fuck up this bad. This is a black and white issue as far as I'm concerned. 1 + 1 = 2. This is easy. If you fail that test, then there's going to be some explaining to do. And if you're right about so many other policy issues, but so out of touch with your own base on this one particular issue, That right there is an indication that you need to recalibrate immediately. Perhaps leave your DC bubble or do a little bit of introspection and maybe even engage with the people who are offering good faith criticisms. They agree with you on everything else, so why is there this misalignment between you and them on this one issue? Why are you so wrong? Or why are they wrong if you think you're right? Because this shirt right here, like, you got to do something. You got to address this because this ain't fucking it. So AOC, as well as Pramila Jayapal, Ayanna Pressley, Greg Kasar, Mark Pocan, Rokana, the others, they all need to do better. They must do better. I expect this kind of immorality and duplicity from Republicans and AIPAC-funded Democrats, but these progressives who should know better, they have no fucking excuse. So damn right we're going to criticize them when they fuck up this badly because this is not okay.